and welcome to Conch Productions Artist Chat September 2025. My name is Magaly Colimon-Christopher. I'm the artistic director and founder of Conch Productions. And I want to welcome you to a chat that is truly exciting me because this year we are presenting Bluelight Reading Series at Queens Public Library in Forest Hills. And today we are chatting with one of the amazing artists whose works we're going to be presenting to you all as a workshop reading. Now, today we are chatting with Chandra Thomas, a proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants, and her play is not just a product of her background, but the fact that she's an award-winning writer, actor, and producer. Her play, The Buzzer, will be presented on October 2nd at Forest Hills Library. And I would love to welcome you. Hi, Chandra. How are you?
Hello, what a warm welcome. I so appreciate that.
So I want to start off with, can you please share a little bit about your journey to being a playwright? I mean, like I shared before, you're a proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants. I'm a proud daughter of Asian immigrants. And so many of our community members are like, how did you get away with being an artist? So how did you come to this art form of playwriting?
Yes, well, absolutely. I'm a very proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants. This is one of my dad's favorite caps. And so, both of my parents, they met in this country. They met in the United States, and they were from very different parts of Jamaica. And the story varies. I have my version of my parents love cute, meet cute story, but essentially what made them decide to stay in the United States is because they said whenever they had a family, they wanted to make sure their children could live any dream, whatever that dream was. And I'm not gonna lie, and parents who are immigrants, when you say you want to be a creative, it's not like, oh, yes, that's exactly what I made these sacrifices for. That was definitely not the first response, but God bless them. They really were committed to this. We said any dream for our children. And what really sort of turned them, right? Because again, initially, right, we're thinking doctor, lawyer, engineer, business, the typical immigrant, and especially West Indian immigrants. But what they really keyed into is just how committed we as creatives are and can be to say something about the world. And so they really tapped into, it's not just to galavant or flaunt, right? But in order to like dig in deeper and say something about ourselves, about our communities, about the world, and hopefully, right, leave the world in a slightly better place than how we found it. And so that's how I was able to get them on board. And like I said, I could not imagine greater champions even now of me and of this work that I do. So what drew me to it? I grew up in New York. My parents, especially my mom, wanted me to be a citizen of the world. And so they would take me to, I saw my first Broadway show when I was like 4 years old.
Wow.
I know, right? So forward.
Do you remember the title? Do you remember the title?
Don't remember what show it was. I really don't. But like, this was something that like was just built into like if you're going to be in this world, right? You need to be able to have like discourse. You need to be able to have exposure. That was my parents, sort of approach. So yeah, so started going to plays very early, got into theater very early. I found it as a way, especially as a first gen, growing, bouncing between so many different communities. There's something very unique about being a first gen, right? In that we are not part of this country, but we're not part of that country either, right? We're sort of in this limbo, a little piece of that, a little piece of this. And so it becomes its own sort of third culture. And so, as a kid, like trying to find my identity in that, trying to, and also like bouncing between different parts of New York, like, I would find myself in spaces where I was the only, whatever you wanted to use, whatever identifier you want to use, I was the only, and so having to, sort of forge identity, theater really served as such a fertile ground, such a foundational place for me to do that. And so that's how I got myself into theater. Started as a performer, actor, started doing producing before I even knew what producing really was.
So flash forward to getting your MFA at Columbia, and then now you're writing this amazing play, The Buzzer. I mean, okay, we're going to flash forward to your MFA at Columbia. We're not going to talk about it because that wasn't acting, but then you wrote The Buzzer. And I want to focus on The Buzzer because tell us more about The Buzzer and what inspired you to write it.
When I first started writing this play, I was thinking about all the roles that we as Black women don't hardly ever get the opportunity to play.
Mm,
That's where I started in terms of just like, what are those characters? Who are those characters? And so one of those characters that came to mind is that messy woman who's trying to figure her life out when she should have figured it out by now, right? She's an adult. We don't often get the coming of age. If we do coming of age, if we get coming of age stories, it's like super young, which is beautiful and important. And I don't want to detract from that. But rarely do we get the like, there's almost always a coming of age, right? That we do like in our adulthood. I would imagine even for people who are in your senior years, you're finding out like a new, the age is different. So you're coming into that, right? And so I literally just started out of like, what are the characters that like, I just haven't gotten an opportunity to audition for, or my peers haven't gotten to audition for, or if there is that one role, it's one every 5 years. And therefore only one of us gets to play it every 5 years, right? And so that's where I started. Just like, what are those characters? And so I came up with, sadly, the list was long, right? The opportunities are not as bountiful as our talents. And so this character, Amelia, who is one of the lead characters in Buzzer, that's how she sort of started, right? As this like faint idea of like, this is the kind of person that I really want to kind of wrestle with. And then, spending up a lot of, I call Harlem, New York home, and lived there for a very long time. And gentrification has been doing quite a number on Harlem. Some might even say that it has like reached its, like whatever gentrification is, it's past that. It's like on the other side of whatever that looks like. And that's, I think, a valid argument. And, so this like idea of like gentrification and also what that looks like, who those people are, so these are sort of like all the things that among the things that were rattling around for me. And also I just love stories where like, people get to like wrestle with love. And so I was like, these are all the things that I just like wanted to unpack, right? And those are sort of like the threads that found their way into Buzzer. And then on top of all that, I found myself, again, with that sort of like coming of age kind of narrative, really thinking about motherhood, right? And what the different states, the different ways that like people mother, folks who don't have children that are of themselves biologically, but still, mother folks. So, these were all sort of like the different sort of disparate pieces that were going on in some way, shape, or form around the times that I was starting to ideate for this play. And those are all the pieces that sort of found their way into this play. So it's really at the core, it's a story. Each of our characters are sort of like wrestling with some piece or sense of their identity. Even sort of the crowd pleaser, Miss Octavia, she's in her own way, right? She's wrestling with like her identity now that her beloved city of Newark, this play is set in Newark, New Jersey, is changing, right? And how does she fit in this changing city around her? So yeah, that's the long answer to your short story.
But this is really important because, quite often people think that, playwriting just kind of happens, but there's a whole journey towards finding the story, creating the story. And Bluelight reading series is that workshop part of that journey, right? So when you were workshopping your play with our co-resident dramaturg, Sasha Wells, is there anything that you discovered in the process that made you go, wow, this is another place for me to go with my play?
It's so interesting. Sasha has such really interesting, it's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives and thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
She had a really interesting response that I was like, "Oh, how do I feel about that?" That response was, she was like, "I don't find a couple of these characters likable." And I was like, "Hmm." And then I had to ask myself, what is likability something that like I'm going after? And like, how important is that? And so I just had to really sort of like dive in. And where I sort of landed was, is relatable, right? Sometimes, the people love to invoke like Tony Soprano. I would never qualify that character as somebody who was likable, but we could relate, right, to this
Hmm.
idea of like
Hmm.
this person wrestling with family and legacy, these kinds of like big questions. And so that's where I came back to, as I was revisiting this play, and was really grateful for the like one of those ways that like I can make sure the relatability of her journey is what is bringing us in, because I think there's something to be said about we're all trying to, sort of like forge an identity or forge an understanding of like who we are and how we are in relation to ourselves, in relation to a loved one, a potential partner, a spouse, whatever these things are, a mother, a father, a neighbor, So yeah, so that's one of the things that I found really compelling, right, in revisiting this play.
So, as everyone knows, Conch Productions, we focus on Voices Caribbean Heritage writers. Why do you feel it's essential to see more Caribbean heritage stories on the US stage? Because that's part of our mission, to bring more of these stories to the stage, bring it more to the film and television spaces. Why do you feel it's important?
Well, let's start at the beginning of we just need more stories than these bland stories that we get too many. And if there's anything that Caribbean stories are not, is bland. So
Mm,
let's start there, right? Next, I will say, they're growing up around Caribbean, West Indian, just like the Caribbean diaspora, really growing up in New York, we around everybody, right? And there's so often we get monolith, right? We are told, like, for most people, that I'll use this example. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was listening. He was reporting back. There was a meeting I couldn't attend. He was reporting back. He's like, "Yeah, there were like three women who spoke at this meeting, and like I don't know, they all sounded Jamaican." And I was like, oh, okay. So then, I go back to hear the playback of this meeting, and literally each one of them sounded like completely different from completely different islands, because they were all from completely different islands, right? But this, like, sort of broadening of the Caribbean to a single thing, right? It's either Jamaican or Puerto Rican, and like there are not many other shades, is first of all such a disservice to the incredible stories, the incredible people, the culture of the across the Caribbean. And so there's just so much that gets lost in this monolithing, we'll call it. So to be able to get these nuanced stories, right? Something that is going to happen in Grenada is not necessarily the same thing that's going to happen in St. Vincent, right? And to be able to get these kinds of really nuanced stories, and there's no question there are some things that are kind of universal, but one of my favorite theater practitioners always says there is universality in specificity. And so to get these
exactly.
specific stories and then find our universal humanity in that, I think is just crucial. It's just crucial. So yeah, I am excited to see more stories from across the Caribbean, and hopefully will do my part to contribute something to that lexicon as well.
In line with contribution, what is your advice to an emerging Caribbean heritage playwright regarding finding their voice? Because, in this era, in this nation, where there's a sense that there's a good citizen versus a bad citizen, whether you're American or whether you're not American, what is your advice to them as they're telling their story? Would you say lean into your Caribbean heritage in your storytelling and having the specificity, or try to do something else that would keep you on the radar beyond being noticed?
I'm always going to start with authenticity. I was literally talking to a TV writer buddy of mine last night, and we were just going back and forth about the necessity of authenticity, to being true
Mm,
to whoever it is that you are, right? And so that can look like a lot of things. To be, while Buzzer isn't on the face of it isn't a Caribbean story, it is a so It is a common experience of those of us who are first gens, especially from the Caribbean, of finding ourselves, right, in a space that may or may not welcome us. And so, right, like to take this thing that feels like my own experience as a person whose parents are from the West Indies, from the Caribbean, and putting it into so authentic to my experience, right? And putting it into the shape of this particular story of the buzzer as an example. So
Beautiful, because I really love you saying that, because I'm a Caribbean diaspora, right? I have multiple cultural viewpoints on what it means to be human. And so when an audience member comes to see the buzzer and they're like, where's the Jamaican story? You're missing the point that this artist is the offspring of Jamaican immigrants. And this is her story from her viewpoint of what it means to be human, given her journey. And that's a very important part of what we do at Conch Productions, right? So when the audience leaves the buzzer, what's the one thought you want them to have in their mind? What would it be?
I want them to have laughed. That's very important to me. If you didn't at least kiki at some point, but then I will be like, my mission has failed. So that's important. But on the bigger scale, really to reflect on our own journey of identity, our own sense of like who and where we are, and also maybe to have a little bit of empathy. There's an assault on what it is to be woman right now, being defined by various people, and to even have this experience of empathy as people are sort of forging their paths, that would be incredible. That would be beautiful for people to walk out with, for people to want to learn more about how the foster care system works and how it's not necessarily serving the community that's intended to serve. That would be something that I would love for people to walk out with, asking questions about, and having curiosity of how we might be better served, how if we are moving into and through a society or a community that we don't necessarily have roots in, how do we become collaborators and neighbors in those communities versus pariahs or harbingers of control in those societies. Like, I think there are a lot of pieces, and even like, there's a very central love story, and of like really taking to task of like, how am I showing up with regard to the people that I love and the people that I say that I love, So I think there are a lot of different angles, which is part of my writing style. I like to like sort of wrestle with like, study small moments, wrestling with big questions. And so I think, depending on where an audience member is coming from, where they meet the play, is sort of what, there are a lot of places that they can tap into.
Wow. Thank you. I'm a huge proponent of art that awakens, and art for social change. And I'm so excited that you're sharing Buzzer with our audience, because it hits all those markers.
I appreciate
So,
that.
If there were 3 words that you would use to describe the Buzzer, 3 words, your words, what would they be?
Love, family, and Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid. All right, now. That just opens up a whole lot of conversation that we're not going to have right now. So we're going to bring this amazing conversation to an end, sadly, but not so sadly. You can come and join us on October 2nd at 5:30 at Forest Hills Library. You'll see the address in the link below, and you're going to see the Buzzer, and you're going to ask Chandra, Kool-Aid, what is that? Now, the Buzzer is directed by Danae Gradison, and you're going to get to meet Danae on the 2nd of October, 5:30. Reading starts at 5:30. We have our conversation with the audience after the reading. Yes, you will indeed get to talk to our creatives. This bold work is really important. And more importantly, it's offered to you for free. thanks to the support of NIFA. NIFA supported the funding of this event, and I am so grateful to share this event with Queens audiences and audiences from all over New York City. So take the train. It's right near the E and the F. Chandra, thank you.
Thank you. And I so appreciate you and your team, Magaly, for allowing this play to have this breath. It's exciting. It's really exciting as a creative. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. And thank you to everyone for watching this interview. See you on October 2nd. Don't be shy. Say hello when you see me.